Hi, Recent Revelry, a pleasure to meet you! Over the past few weeks, I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons online via Twitch, and I thought to myself, maybe I could produce more content. So here I have. In this video today, I'm going to be going through a new player experience for Dungeons & Dragons Online, as of 2021, highlighting basically what the new experience is, and maybe highlighting a few things that new players won't exactly get off the dart. Hopefully this will be a good introduction video, and if you like the video, please feel free. Before we get started, I'm not a field expert in Dungeons & Dragons Online. I've put a few hours in on my Twitch channel, probably up to about level 9 at this point, but realistically I'd say I've divested enough time to realistically provide what a new player experience should be, and maybe highlight a few things that a new player might get a bit confused on. And it is sort of my explanation to get these across to you, so that you can start the game on an easier footing. And with that, we're going to get into part 1 of the video. Once you've managed to boot up the game, you will be greeted with the standard creation screen. Selecting onto the creation options, you will be made to create your first character for the game, which can be a big step. Your first selection will have you choose a style, which realistically boils down to whether or not you want to be a fighter-based, magic-based, or specialist-based character, which, going from the lines of a fighter, could be a fighter or barbarian. A magic-based one is noted as sorcerers and wizards, or a specialist character being some supportish characters like bards and rogues. For the purposes of this review, however, I'm going to be dealing with the wizard aspect of this build, and chosen a path of simplicity. A point of issue that can be raised at this time is that the paths haven't been updated since realistically the game first came out, meaning that it hasn't updated with the content which you'll be currently playing. Well, don't let this stop you from playing if you want to select the class paths line just so that the game is easier for you in the first instance. But I just need to make you aware that it's not that difficult to go off the beaten path, which I'll go into in a further tip below. But it is a sort of good opportunity to make you aware that these paths may not be as powerful as they might have once been. Whilst I won't get onto the character creation and appearance options, as there are more personal preference, there are decent ways that you can customise your character for a game of this era, meaning that it shouldn't be too much of an issue, despite the fact that some races are locked due to payment options. Once you've decided through your character designs, you'll be dropped into the world of D&D Online for your first introductory mission onto the Isle of Korthos. After starting off, you realise that the game utilises a standard WASD system for moving around, so it's not really that much different from a standard MMORPG. As well, the standard system of left-click targeting is also in the game, which can be also used to interact with characters and individuals. And holding down the right-click in this game also initiates an action camera, which can be useful in some senses, but will not be the focus for now. A good tip to note is that you could switch between a cursor and action-based cameras using the Alt-T key, which is a big help because sometimes I accidentally hit on the camera as well. Moving forward from this basis, interacting with the individuals and scenery and dropped items in the game can also be done not only through the left mouse button, but also using the interactions via the E key, which is also useful for picking up items off the ground. Sometimes it is difficult to pick up items off the ground using the left click mouse button because, unfortunately, the targeting system can be a little bit balked, but utilising the E key as you can tab onto the item is an easier way to click on there as it is a general purpose aspect. And with this in mind, we'll move over to the combat. Combat in Dungeons & Dragons Online is a little bit more unique than some games that we associate from the early 2000s. Firstly, auto-attacking in this game is done by a left click, which can also cause some issues with NPCs and interaction, seeing as the weapon is always drawn in this game. Whether or not, depending on the function of the button, you'll then use the attack as a melee or ranged attack, depending on its use. And one of the key facts to note that this is a game that does use ammo systems for their bows and ranged weapons, but they are also easy to find and purchase from some vendors. Given the combat aspects in this game, you can use abilities in lieu of this, with casters being given the additional resource of SP or spell points to manage, which is effectively mana, which are consumed by activating spells. Spells and kills are also on a global cooldown basis, so it's also always useful to continue utilising auto attacks whilst waiting for these abilities and the global cooldown to come off. And for the first few levels, you need to realistically rely on the elements of auto attacking with your skills and abilities, but as you level up, you will attain feat, which will unlock different abilities and skills, which means combat still feels enjoyable because you are still utilising an auto attack, meaning that it's consistent, and then you add in abilities and spells then once they come off to continue the flow of combat. Ultimately, I feel that the combat in this game scales well, even from the lower to higher levels, as the developing roster your skills and skill points that you'll input into this game realistically gives you a continuing flow in the game and makes sure that combat is fun and viable. And with that, we'll move on to the next section of traps and secrets. Going forward in your adventure, especially into the first dungeon, Dungeons & Dragons Online gives you a first snip of what you will be experiencing in future adventures. Secrets and traps. Secret areas and doors are usually often indicated by the spot skill as a passive, which will usually flag up saying there is something in the area, but then will require you to use your search skill to try and locate these. These will then be flagged up as sort of illuminated objects, and will be used to sort of hide bonus objectives into the area and or give you further abilities and areas to reach, which usually tie into bonus objectives. Furthermore, this ties into the trap system, which is another supplementary one. Throughout the world of Dungeons & Dragons Online, you'll be presented with a multitude of traps, and the likes that will range from the benign to the outright deadly. These are scoped out by the same spot skill, but unfortunately, even if you do find them by the search skill, unless you are a rogue or artificer class, you will not be able to interact with them. So it is best to avoid these correctly, or you realistically use one of your hirelings to set them off. However, this should not stop you from going on to the next point of this video. Questing and adventures are a lot different than a lot of the mainstream MMORPGs in this case. Quests are taken up from quest NPCs located in hub areas, but then you are guided into personal instances that can be shared with party members. These will be your main source of experience in the world of D&D Online, which obviously facilitates both the story and the loot. These adventures can range in variety, noted from the shortest foray into a dungeon, just beating up a few thugs, all the way from lengthy excursions to ancient dungeons, which are consistently one after the other. When you accept a quest from an NPC in a hub area, you will then be inclined to enter the dungeon, which you can accept and set difficulty levels to, but this is a topic for another time, as you will automatically be set to normal difficulty for all the ones you wish to do. Completing the objectives, and sometimes given bonus objectives, will then allow you to leave the dungeon with a quest completed, but bonus objectives are provided to you mid-dungeon as sort of an example of killing a certain individual, and you will be given some certain measure of additional experience due to the difficulty of this nature. And with the default key of X, you'll be able to show the sort of different layouts and the different levels of experience you will be getting from that dungeon, including optional side objectives. And once you complete this mission then, you exit, or using the recall function which can teleport you out from the start of the dungeon, and then leads you on to the next form of experiences, which are the wilderness zones. In your time in Korthos Village, you may see a gate into the Korthos Wilderness which you won't be able to initially enter or go into. This is due to the quests and the narrative, but once you have completed them, you'll be greeted with your first wilderness zone in D&D Online. Wilderness zones are the most open zones in Dungeons & Dragons Online for content. That being said, you get a lot of exploration in the forms of finding specific points, slayer tasks, which means you kill a load of monsters, or killing and finding rare encounters, which are rare mobs that will only spawn in a particular instance at certain times, meaning that you would have to go into the area multiple times to find them. These are additional aspects in the side content, but more importantly, they're usually used as vehicles to get you from this area to a quest that is presumably out in that area as well, which means you will ultimately be using them to get to new quest hubs or quest locations. Whilst I'm not going to show you more of the Korthos Wilderness, the remainder of the quests on the island will take you through this area, which will naturally teach you how and what you need to be looking for in this area, and such as rare encounters and landmarks, but I'll let you look into that in future just so you have something to look forward to, which moves us on to the final parts of this video. Your next steps in the world of Eberron after doing all this are realistically your own, but what I would suggest is to continue with the Korthos Village questline until you've completed it, and then are instructed to go to Stormreach via the heart and into the harbour. You'll come out in the harbour and it may be a little bit of an overwhelming experience, but trust me, if you just go along the lines of doing the quests in around in the harbour and just getting acquainted with the general layout of the area and the hub, you'll more than likely in no time find your way sort of getting into the grips of the game, and you'll be exposed to the wider game at large, which is a good part of where you'll be spending the majority of time after Korthos Village. But otherwise, I'll give you just a few further bonus tips to get into the game further. Tip 1 is Hirelings. You should use hirelings if you're playing as a solo player, which can be attained specifically from hireling vendors dotted around the hub areas. These will supply you with an NPC helper to supplement your playstyle. If you want a pocket healer, for instance, take a cleric. If you want a more damage or tank sort of variety, look for a 5-year-old barbarian. These hireling contracts last about an hour from when they first use, only when inside the dungeon, meaning that their timer is paused when you're outside. But once you start getting experience and coin, they are a worthwhile stable to keep with you to help you get through some of the hard level content which you may struggle with as a solo player. Point 2 has to be dealing with splitting from a dedicated path line from a class once you've gone through a few levels. Now, as I talked about earlier, you can split from your main class path that's provided to you and go on what is called a custom path. Splitting from the dedicated class path, or not choosing one at all, is a great way to diverge and ultimately will make sure you're getting the best experience from the game. As we see in the character creation tool, you have the ability to customize your own path from the character creation stage, which allows you to allocate your stat line, your skill points, and even an initial feat, instead of taking the option of a delegated path through the game. With this in mind, it is always a good idea to look into some potential build guides on the internet via some higher tier players such as Deathy and Strimtom, as they will be able to provide you with the current tier guilds for current content at the highest level. Final tip of the video is how to get a horse. Sounds a bit strange, doesn't it? Getting a mount in Dungeons & Dragons Online isn't too difficult, but it does require you to have some of the additional content installed. One of the adventure packs you can get is called Keep on the Borderlands, which may set you back some DDO coin, but you can get it for free at certain times because standing games are very good at giving out packs. Once you have this, you need to speak to the NPC gatekeeper who is suspiciously close to the exit of the first dungeon when you're put into Corthus Village. And once taken there, you can go to the Keep on the Borderlands, which is also a level 1 to 3 questing hub, meaning it can be used as an additional way to get further experience whilst you're at Corthos. At the hub, you'll need to speak to the Stable Master to begin your quest for 15 feather tokens that are dropped by rare encounters across the Keep Borderlands wilderness area, and eventually you'll find yourself with a mount. As it stands, I feel that Dungeons & Dragons Online is one of the most unique and free experiences on the market currently, and realistically continues to inspire me to continue playing the game despite the lack of monetary input I've put into the game. If you're an individual looking for a new MMO experience, or a fan of the older style MMORPGs, I definitely think this is a consideration in a game that you should give consideration for playing. That being said, this is the end of the video now, so I thank you for watching the video if you've managed to stick to it this far. It's been a pleasure to see you, and it'll be a pleasure to meet you again soon. Take care.